This conference will now be recorded.
Good evening, everyone. I now call to order the meeting of the Town Commission on May 3rd, 2021 at 6 p.m. Thank you to those who are listening to our live audio feed. Just a reminder that the live audio feed is no longer interactive. Those who wish to make public comment during the meeting are encouraged to attend in person in our socially distanced chambers or send comments to the town clerk prior to the meeting. Clerk Armstrong, will you please call the roll?
Commissioner Cos?
Here.
Mayor DeHassett?
Present.
Vice Mayor Herbert?
Here.
Commissioner Pugh?
Here.
Commissioner Eastman?
Here.
Will you please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Excuse us for starting a few minutes late and eating pizza on the dais. We had our first 2 o'clock budget meeting. Okay, additions, deletions, modifications, and approval of agenda. At last commission meeting, there was a consensus to suspend and modify the rules of debate, which is 9.1, for our regular agenda items, which is number 2 on the agenda and number 3. These modifications and suspension of the rules are specifically for these 2 items, and what will happen, we will have commissioner comments after a staff presentation on the item. We will invite the public for public comment, and then after the public comments, commissioners will discuss and take the vote. So do I have consensus to do as?
Yeah, thank you very much.
You're more than welcome. Consensus, yes. The only other addition that I would like to suggest for the agenda is I would like to add a few comments under mayor comments at the very end of the meeting. Okay?
That would be number, I don't know if I'm ready.
Well, and
Number
then
12.
Mayor, I also need to remove item 1E from the agenda.
1C?
1E.
Oh, E.
Okay. I'll now entertain a motion on the approval of the modified agenda.
So moved.
That is a motion by Commissioner Pugh, a second by Vice Mayor Hurlbert. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. I now like to welcome our Boynton Beach Fire Chief, John Staples.
Good evening, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me through the mask. My name is Jim Staples. I'm the new fire chief in Boynton Beach. I've been here about 5 months. I'm still on my walking around tour, figuring everything out and sorting through some things. I'm a 37-year fire rescue veteran. I've served for several departments, and I've been the chief of several departments. And honored to be here, and we're honored to provide service to you all. And, is there any questions I can answer for you?
I had a question. I noticed that there is a change in the format of the report that you guys are providing. And visually, it is very easy to understand and attractive. I would still like to see by each call, when the call came in, the length of response and what the outcome of that was.
Okay.
That's something I think that's important for us, and I'm asked by residents all the time, and the way that I can defend you in saying that you got there as quick as you can and were within the limits is by having that information.
The beauty of such a small response amount is we can dig deeper into those particular details. A lot of times in agencies, there's statistical relevance based on the number of calls as opposed to a smaller number of calls. So we're able to drill down much better for your data than my data. So 800 calls a month, roughly to 1,000. So drilling down in those takes a little bit more, but absolutely, thank you. And we could certainly provide that detailed information as well.
And I believe that Bryony would probably like that information also.
And it's still available. So you're going to see me as a fire chief pushing for accreditation of the Boynton Beach Fire Department. Part of that will be dealing with some performance metrics that you may have never seen before, involving fire rescue times and setting benchmarks and expectations. I don't know that that's been a clear vision, if you will. So it's some of the stuff that becomes transparent so everybody's aware of the same things and understands. So
Fantastic, thank you.
you're welcome.
Could I ask the chief one question which may shed some light on some of his incentives and what he's planning on going forward? When we were meeting last week, you brought up your response time analysis and the fact that we can't speed up how fast we drive and the impediments that show up in our response times and how you view those differently than we probably have in the past. I think that would be a very, very good thing to look at.
Absolutely. So with the gray hairs and the amount of experience I have in this business, a lot of times younger firefighters will think that going faster gets you to the call quicker. In a small response area, that's not translatable to meaningful minutes, seconds for things. So what I've put a focus on is getting out of the station quicker, the flex turnout time, the speed at which they get on the apparatus, get out the door. If that's 30 seconds, that's 30 seconds save in response, as opposed to going 5 miles an hour faster in a 1.5 mile square area does not change the response matrix enough or translate to meaningful time savings.
Is there a way, and it's just a technical question, do you guys, if you have a call here in Ocean Ridge, do you guys call ahead on the bridge to leave the bridge down?
The answer is yes, our dispatch does make contact. However, if the bridge is already up or we're on the road and here, it takes the time it takes for it to go down or go up. It's some of the design of fire stations that I'm looking at as well, because the fire station design has to contribute to the members getting on apparatus out of a dead sleep, for example. Putting them up on a second floor without an expeditious way to get them down to the first floor where the apparatus is. So those are some of the things that we look at when we design facilities to make sure. The other part is it's a process. So if we can address it through dispatch where they can get a hold, trains are another great example. If I got cut off by the train, now you can't stop trains, no matter how much you try. The trains are going, commerce continues to move. So that's part of the challenge for us, is when you add all of those things, kind of like dead ends. If you don't have a loop to get back around, you may get to a dead end and you have to reroute yourself. So.
And that's why some of the calls are coming out of Fire Station 1 and sometimes they're coming out of Fire Station 4, I believe.
And it all depends on where the call is, who the closest station is. And if there's a unit on the road that's closer, that's the one that's going to go, because we have an enhanced CAD system that actually pays attention to that and says this unit is much closer than bringing them out of quarters. And they're already on the road, so the cut down of turnout time is there.
Doing a great job.
Thank you.
Thanks.
May I? I'd just like to thank you, Chief, for the COVID-19 vaccination clinic that the city of Boynton put on. It was very well done. I was a recipient of that, and I introduced myself to you at that time, you remember?
I agree.
But the way you ran that operation was phenomenal.
So it was a citywide thing. I will tell you, I appreciate you giving me that, and I will definitely feed it back to the team. But that is a great demonstration of municipal government being effective and efficient.
Right.
And everybody was involved in the success of that process. So I'm giving away some of my thunder of what I'm going to be presenting to my commission as well. But that process, as I said, I'm only here 5 months. It reinforced why I'm here. And, the true teamwork that comes together to deliver a great service. And I couldn't be prouder of the effort that everybody put in. So thank you for recognizing that. We really appreciate that. Anything else? Thank you very much, y'all. Thanks for putting me on the front end too.
Thank you.
Y'all have a great day.
Okay, next up on the agenda is a presentation by the Southeast Palm Beach County Climate Change Vulnerability Assessment that we participated in. Town Manager Stevens, would you please introduce Mr. Bogna and Mrs. Perez?
So Liz Perez is president and founder of Collective Water Resources, LLC. She received her Bachelor of Science from the University of Florida's Environmental Engineering Department and her Master of Science in Civil Engineering from the Georgia Institute of Technology. Liz has established a strong reputation as a water resources expert throughout Florida, not only for her technical work, but also for her dedication to various technical publications and community groups. Most notably, she has served as a member of the National Energy, Environment, and Water Policy Committee and the American Society of Civil Engineers. Liz believes that technology and environmental preservation can coexist, and she has dedicated her life to this vision. She thoroughly enjoys bringing her passion for the environment, collaboration, and data to clients. Alec Bogdanoff, PhD, is a policy-trained oceanographer and meteorologist specializing in science communication. He is the principal scientist and co-founder of Brasaga, an engineering consulting company focused on identifying and effectively communicating flood risk and climate change, including sea level rise and assisting to reduce that risk. He is passionate about working with local governments to review and implement policies that consider the impacts of climate change. Alec holds a PhD in physical oceanography from MIT and the Woods Hole Oceanography Institution, and MS and BS degrees in meteorology from Florida State. Previously, he also served as a Sea Grant Fellow for the U.S. Senator on Capitol Hill, working on climate and oceans policy.
Very impressive. Go on.
Let me just give you a little overview here. So we entered the Coastal Resilience Partnership, as you know, with 7 other municipalities in Palm Beach County to do a vulnerability assessment. And Alec and Liz are here tonight to present the results of that assessment.
Thank you, Tracy, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Commissioners. Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to talk with you about the climate change. I'll just let you know. Thank you. So a little bit about the Coastal Resilience Partnership. You are all represented by 8 local governments, including the county. Here we have the participating entities of the Coastal Resilience Partnership. As part of this activity, we not only looked at doing a vulnerability assessment, but also thinking about how we present this group to the community. And so as part of it, there's now a logo for the Coastal Resilience Partnership of Southeast Palm Beach County. It's a lot of great work being recognized on a state and national level. This is really how groups of municipalities with similar municipality threats and communities should start thinking about climate change. You know, at the end of the day, water doesn't care about political boundaries, and you all are very interconnected. We just had the fire chief from Boynton Beach here, and that really tells us that this is an issue we need to think about on more than just a single municipal scale. So first of all, what is vulnerability and risk, and why assess it? So the way I like to think about this is vulnerability is basically how much something is exposed, but also how much it can adapt. And so you can think about a park next to a firehouse. It's a great example. They might have the same exposure. They might both see 3 feet of flooding. But at the end of the day, that fire station is more vulnerable to the flooding than that park. A park underwater for a little bit probably isn't going to do too much damage. It's not going to change the critical nature of city services, but that fire station will, especially in places where you have limited resources like Ocean Ridge. And so it's important not just to consider exposure. And that's what a lot of assessments do. They just look at, is it going to flood or is it not going to flood? We wanted to look at how much is at risk, how vulnerable it is. So we also looked at risk, which puts a probability to these events. So not just, hey, it might flood, but what is the likelihood of that flooding occurring? And so those two together allowed us to look at a joint vulnerability and risk score. And so we were able to qualitatively and quantitatively assess every single asset in Southeast Palm Beach County on an asset level. So we drilled down to the asset level, every asset in Ocean Ridge, every asset in Southeast Palm Beach County, and looked at it across 12 different hazards. And we'll talk about those in a minute. So the study followed a fairly straightforward process. This is a process that NOAA uses, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration uses through their US Climate Toolkit. So we explored climate threats. Through a stakeholder engagement process, we narrowed those down to top 12 threats that we wanted to explore in Southeast Palm Beach County. We assembled data on all of the systems across the entire region. So I mean, collecting data from every single municipality, from the county, from the federal and state government, and building a database so that we could really assess these assets. Then we were able to assess the vulnerabilities and risks. We investigated potential adaptation strategies, not just on a regional or micro-regional basis, but actually for each individual municipality. So there are specific adaptation strategies for Ocean Ridge. And lastly, we're finalizing the report, so there'll be a executive summary and the final report released this week to the local governments. So these threats, there are a lot of threats associated with climate change, but talking to the staff and getting their input. So Tracy served as your representative to that steering committee. And so ultimately, we narrowed it down to these 12. The first two are meteorological, so high winds associated generally with hurricanes and rainfall-induced flooding. The second two are health-related, so harmful algal blooms, pest and disease outbreak. The next three are heat-related, so extreme heat, drought, and wildfire. And the next four are water or flood-related, so shoreline recession, so you can think about that as beach erosion, tidal flooding, which you all are intimately familiar with here, storm surge, groundwater inundation, and separately saltwater intrusion. And so it's important, especially in places like Ocean Ridge, to think about what sea level rise means. This is really the most visible sign of climate change for our region. So we looked at three different scenarios. So we looked at 5 inches, 13 inches, and 33 inches of sea level rise. And it was important for us not to just think about times, because there's a lot of uncertainty in when this is going to happen, but look at discrete amounts of sea level rise. So ultimately, it ends up being the high end and low end of what we can expect in 2040, and then kind of the low end and the medium to high end of what we can expect in 2070. We didn't look at the highest end in 2070, one, it's 50 years from now, two, it's really challenging for coastal communities to think about that level of sea level rise. It's also just from a probability standpoint, not quite something I think this team was comfortable with really exploring. We also we grouped assets, so this allowed us to look at all, assets across all parts of local government and the community, so critical facilities like fire stations and police stations, transportation and mobility, looking at roadways. Something this study did, which we'll talk about, is we looked at roadways and access, which the mayor noted is really important. We didn't just look at whether an asset could flood, but it's important whether or not you can get to it. Water infrastructure, natural resources, economic factors, people and socioeconomics, and lastly, property. So that's businesses and individual homes. And this was a very public and stakeholder-driven process. I will say when we started this, I don't think we expected it to be a completely virtual project. This is the first time we're seeing Tracy through this entire project. And so not just coordinating 8 municipalities, but also doing stakeholder engagement across Southeast Palm Beach County was really a challenge during COVID. But we did hold 2 public workshops. We had 6 staff workshops, and we did a micro-regional survey where we received almost 1,000 individual submissions to that survey. And one of the things we asked was, what threat do you think is most going to have the biggest negative impact? So tidal flooding was one, which is not surprising. Second was shoreline recession, which I think surprised a lot of us, but it shows how important the beaches are to this community. And then lastly is extreme heat. And so that helped us kind of, when we started thinking about strategies, understand what we should focus on. And so here's just a quick overview of community flood risk. So this is the entire region, broken down by commercial, industrial, and residential. What you'll notice is right now there's less than 1% of the properties in the region vulnerable to tidal flooding. A lot of them do end up being on the barrier island. From a storm surge perspective, it's fairly significant, again, along the coastal community in Barrier Island, but rainfall-induced flooding, which is something we don't think a lot about, is actually one of the biggest flood risk challenges for the region. And so while there's a lot of thought and input on storm surge and tidal flooding, we wanted to really remind folks that rainfall-induced flooding, your stormwater systems are a primary flood defense and require a lot of work. So for tidal flooding, and I don't think I need to really explain this to you all too much in detail, but ultimately we did this for every threat. We looked at climate stressors and non-climate stressors. We listed all of the data that we used, and ultimately that allowed us to kind of explore each threat on an individual basis. So here is a flood assessment for the region. We have regional maps, and what you are looking at is the redder color have higher vulnerability and risk scores. And you will notice that the coastal communities, especially for tidal flooding, do have those redder colors, which indicates higher vulnerability and risk. What I really wanted to highlight was that, and we'll get into Ocean Ridge specific, but for a region with 33 inches of sea level rise, there's $12 billion of real estate that are exposed on a near daily basis. And so that's a tremendous amount of real estate in the community. And that equates to almost 4,000 assets. And so from an Ocean Ridge perspective, if we look at 2020 currently, it's about 7 assets equating to $5.3 million in value. But by 2020 plus 33 inches, it ends up being 40% of the community, $272 million in value. But if you compare that to the number of the miles of inaccessible roads, it tells a little bit of a different story, where while 40% of the assets have a high vulnerability risk score, 83% of the roadway, the major roadways, and 79% of the minor roadways end up being inaccessible. So this paints a story that the roadways, as we expect, flood before the properties, but that means we need to start thinking about how you adapt those over time to make sure that people can not just their property doesn't flood, but the roadways don't, and they're able to actually reach those homes. This is just an example that you all are probably very familiar with as an area, but we wanted to kind of show from a current tidal flooding perspective where you might see existing tidal flooding, and then with just 13 inches of sea level rise, I say just, but that is still a significant amount of sea level rise. You notice that one of the main arteries to Boynton ends up being impassable. And so this is when we talked about being a multi-jurisdictional challenge. This isn't something just Ocean Ridge is worried about. This is something the entire community is worried about, how we get across that, the intercoastal waterway there.
And that's Ocean Avenue Bridge, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
And so we broke adaptation strategies into 6 categories. I'm not going to spend too long explaining each of them individually, but we looked at infrastructure, how we adapt individual infrastructure. We broke it into land use, building codes and standards, planning, policy, and management not associated with land use, capacity building. So how do you make sure that the community can adapt? Resilience is more than just building strong buildings. You have to build a sense of place and a community so people come together and really address these challenges together. Public outreach, which you all do a fantastic job of from a flood risk perspective. I always tell folks about your spindle outside that has all of the flood risk and FEMA information you could possibly need, which is just a great example of simple things you can do to educate the public. And of course, funding and financing as we come off of a budget hearing. And so one of the things we also focused on as from the region is social equity. So at the end of the day, those who are going to be hit first and hardest by climate change are generally those who don't have the resources to really adapt. And so one of the things we think about, and we have to remind folks, is it's not just, I think traditionally folks think it's, you live near the coast, you're fine. But for a lot of folks, their home is their primary asset. They don't necessarily have the money to adapt. And so we need to start thinking about that and how we support communities to really help those who may not have the resources to help themselves in a way that protects themselves. And so in conclusion, for this community, you have what we noted as 3 primary assets of concern. This probably doesn't surprise you because you all don't have a laundry list of assets, but Town Hall is a vulnerable asset from a storm surge perspective, from a future sea level rise perspective. The beach parking lots as well, and then the natural coastal lands around the community. Obviously, those are great flood protection and want to make sure that those are protected as flood protection for the community. And so some strategies we wanted to highlight were implementing shoreline protection, natural or otherwise, to protect shorelines and mitigate erosion, to prioritize nutrient reduction through a multi-pronged approach, which might include septic to sewer, multi-benefit stormwater projects, and improved monitoring. And lastly, conduct an annual review of the sea level rise strategy before the capital budget processing to ensure coordination and making sure you're taking into account future needs in the current CIP. And so I like to end with money because that's always an important thing. Ultimately, we want this community and CRP to be prepared for federal and state grants. The state just put out $600 million this year for resilience projects. This is on top of money you may see from the federal government and ultimately future funds that the federal government plans on putting out. We're also seeing that communities that act sooner see preserved property value. Communities that act are seeing increased property value. Communities that don't and the homes flood may see reduced property value. You build your budget off of property value and property taxes. So if we adapt today, we'll have more money to adapt in the future. If we wait and property values go down, you either have to raise taxes to raise the funds, or you may not have the money to act at all. And so that is a challenge a lot of communities may face in the future. We're also seeing bond ratings increase for communities that act. They've actually seen their bond ratings increase, and the bond rating agencies have noted, because you adapted, because you spent money on flooding and sea level rise, we are going to increase your bond rating, and they put so in the reports. And lastly, planning will allow for exploration of innovative financing and public-private partnerships. There's more appetite from the private sector to start getting involved. If they see you're acting and creating a plan, they're more likely to figure out how to work with you and fund projects. And so thank you. And with that, I do want to applaud you all in the work you're doing. I think for a small community to work together with their neighbors to really start thinking about this is incredibly forward thinking, really shows that you understand that this is a multi-jurisdictional problem that you all cannot solve on your own. And so this is a model for other folks across the nation to really look at in taking a multi-jurisdictional approach. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Any questions from the commission? You look like you're getting ready to say something.
I have so many questions, but
Okay,
I'll reserve.
Okay.
I've got one. So we're talking about our select municipal strategies. Right up there is septic to sewer, which you probably know by now that we've been focusing and working towards and what have you. And then we're talking about 600 million for resilience-based projects. We got turned down on our first request for a grant. How do we go forward and maybe try and access some of that for this perfectly listed select municipal strategy?
So the first thing I would say is multi-benefit is really important, especially as we start thinking about water quality. Making a water quality argument from a septic to sewer standpoint is really important. And as more funds become available, there'll be more opportunities. I think a lot of times septic to sewer is left off the list because of the cost and just general caveats around who's responsible. The state is realizing it's really important and putting more money towards it. So I think there'll be more opportunities. Unfortunately, sometimes it takes a couple tries to get funding.
Right.
So don't get discouraged. I think, frankly, from DEP standpoint, they're looking at what you all are doing from a CRP perspective, and they're watching. I know that they know the CRP really well, and they talk about it. And so I think you've built a lot of goodwill by working as a region and start thinking about these issues from a regional basis, because you can't solve the septic to sewer issue on your own. You're going to have to work with municipal partners to start thinking about treatment and where that goes. And so I think it's important to have those conversations and come up with a plan and think about it from a regional standpoint and not just
We do
an individual.
basically have a pseudo plan. We've been working on this. So you're basically saying, just keep at it, right? You have
Absolutely.
a grant writer and just keep at it.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. One of the requests I had, and you did a great job in both visually laying it out and taking a very complicated and multi-dimensional problem and trying to simplify it as much as you can. I've been at this not as long as you have, but the Rising Water Task Force, it started almost 9 years ago, and Delray, I was part of the initial group on that. One of the things that I would like to see for for us to be able to translate this into a really workable plan for our engineer and for our staffing is to take a look at and have a little bit of a further drill down on some of the things that are very specific to Ocean Ridge. So while you've got a community overview, can we have the residential Ocean Ridge vulnerability overview? When you have the Ocean Ridge asset and transportation, can we back that up with maybe maps that visually show which, I can tell you probably what the 5 major accessible streets are, but I want that list. So just really just drilling down a little bit further so we can really make sure that this matches with our 5-year CIP and make sure that we're funding. It was gratuitous that you're here today after a 4-hour budget meeting. So, but fantastic, first job out of the gate.
So Tracy told me I only had about 15 to 20 minutes. I probably could have spent half a day talking to you guys in detail about this report. So in the full report, you will have that information.
Okay.
Each community also got a spreadsheet with the detailed information, asset by asset, what's at risk, and ultimately, what is the score associated with each asset. We can pull that even on a more granular basis if you want to look per year. You also have access to a tool that allows you to go in and look really on an individual basis at every single threat and what it means. And so all of that will be available to you. I know Tracy is coordinating it and has more information if you all need.
Thank you. I can't help but giving a shout out to our former Vice Mayor, Don Magruder. I'm sure he would have loved to have been here tonight to see and hear this. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Okay. Clerk Armstrong, will you please read the announcements?
A budget meeting will be held on July 6th at 2 p.m. at the Town Hall. The next regular commission meeting will be held on July 6th at 6 p.m. at Town Hall. The next Planning and Zoning Commission meeting will be held on June 21st at 8 a.m. at Town Hall. The Town Hall will be closed on Monday, July 5th in observance of Independence Day. The Town Commission will consider appointments to the following board positions at the July 6th, 2021 Town Commission meeting. Planning and Zoning Commission alternate for 1-year term. Interested residents must be registered to vote in Ocean Ridge and submit a resume and letter of interest to the town clerk at the deadline of June 25th, 2021. Please join us each month prior to the Town Commission meeting at 5 p.m. for the Building Official Educational Forum in the Commission Chambers at Town Hall. Details, including the topics to discuss each month, are on the town website. Residents who wish to sign up to receive important town notifications and news to be ready should sign up on the town's website or call Town Hall for assistance.
Thank you. I'll now open the floor to public comment.
I just have a couple of comments having sat through the budget meeting. Number one, I didn't see $1 in there to rent the property. My property that the sidewalk is on, and I only bring that up so that it'll never go to.
Betty, can you do me a favor and give us your name and address and maybe take down the map if you're comfortable? It's very hard.
I just says that they'll never take the property by squatters' rights to afford A1A. There are several places the sidewalk is on private property. So every couple of years, I remind people of that, so that the town will never think it owns all the property that the sidewalks are. Well, that's number one. Number two, in talking to people around the town, and everybody, I hope that you understand how valuable our police department is. Most of the people in Ocean Ridge consider the police department the heart and soul of this town. And if you look at what's happened in a lot of places where they have not kept their police department up to snuff, we don't want to go that way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Matthew Scott. I'm an attorney at the law firm of Danae, Municipal, and Backman with an address of 14 Southeast 4th Street in Boca Raton. I'm here on behalf of my client, who is a property owner in the town. My client, the entity name is Waterfront ICW Properties LLC. I imagine you're all familiar. This is an entity that the primary stakeholder entity is William Swain, owns the property behind City Hall. There's been litigation going on for 8 years. I can share with you that I'm relatively new to this matter. I was hired, I'm a zoning attorney. I do land use and permitting type work, development type work, so I'm new to this. But as I'm sure you're all familiar with, there's been litigation going on for give or take 7 or 8 years. So I was asked by my client to come tonight just to sort of plead with the town to direct your staff, direct your attorneys to work with us on a potential mediation, perhaps even designate a person on behalf of the town to attend the mediation, because from our perspective, and of course I understand there's litigation ongoing, but from our perspective, this is a matter that should be resolved. It's in the town's benefit to resolve this, because the primary things my client are seeking is a statutory waiver of necessity, right? So just access to their property, which is a right that every property holder in the state has. And then an ability to build on their property and construct a seawall. And so this litigation that's been going on 8 years, my understanding is it's preceded almost everyone in this room, is costing the town, right, tens of thousands of dollars every single year. You guys had your budget meetings today, and I saw in the budget backup material how much legal fees are. I would only guess that some portion of that is attributable to this ongoing litigation. And so my client asked me to come tonight just to sort of share with you all their openness to sitting down, meeting with you. In addition, we've been applying for permits. That's why I was hired to help with some of the seawall type stuff, fill permits. And I can share that the town surprisingly wouldn't even sit down and meet with me to talk about process for that. So I came tonight because I'm not sure if all of this makes its way up the ladder. And as a land use and zoning attorney that works in over, I don't know, 20 or 30 municipalities, I was shocked to hear that your building official, your planning and zoning department wouldn't even sit down and meet to talk about what we might be required to do. So I'm coming tonight sort of pleading, understanding that litigation is ongoing, understanding that it's adversarial, right? And that you may not likely don't agree with everything I'm saying, but coming tonight just to speak out loud to you, because it's not an opportunity to talk to you guys one-on-one with litigation ongoing, understandably. But I'm here tonight to just say that there is an openness to mediation. We'd really love to sit down and do a mediation to try to resolve this, and think it's in the best interest of all parties involved, including the town, to resolve this ongoing dispute. So thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you very much. Okay, any further public comment? Seeing none, the general public comment period is now closed. Okay, take a look at the consent agenda. Item E has been removed. I'll now entertain a motion for the approval of the consent agenda.
Can I just read it for the record, Mayor?
Oh, the removal?
No, just the items.
Oh, sure.
Adopt minutes of the regular town commission meeting of May 3rd, 2021. Adopt minutes of special town commission meeting of April 19th, 2021. Adopt minutes of the special town commission meeting of May 10th, 2021. Acceptance of the revenue and expenditure report for April 2021. Authorize town manager Stevens to sign a contract with AT&T and Expert Communications /iPhone for telephone and internet services. Authorize town manager Stevens to sign the communication service tax agreement for access to confidential state tax information between the town of Ocean Ridge and the Florida Department of Revenue.
Thank you. Sorry. I'll now entertain a motion for the approval of consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
That is a motion by Commissioner Pugh, a second by Commissioner Cos. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Moving on to agenda item number 2, ordinance number 2021-03. Clerk Armstrong, please read the ordinance by title into the record.
Ordinance 2021-03, an ordinance of the town of Ocean Ridge, Florida, amending its code of ordinances at chapter 64, zoning, article 3, supplemental regulations, section 64-41, accessory uses, buildings and structures, generally to address the allowance of due crossover by administrative special exception if seaward of the 1979 coastal construction control line to address due crossover steps, providing for codification, repeal of completing ordinances, severability, and an effective date.
Thank you. Town Attorney Godot, please advise us on this item.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. If you recall at the May meeting, Commissioner Cos brought up the issue of how there were two kind of inconsistent ordinances that were passed, the one setting forth the 1979 coastal construction control line as the setback line for all property, and then the ordinance dealing with the dune crossovers that continue to allow dune crossovers, but set forth specific requirements. So constructing a new dune crossover, if it crossed over that 1979 coastal construction control line, you now have to go to the Board of Adjustment, which added some cost and delays to your project. So I brought the issue up. We took it on May 17th to the Planning and Zoning Board to amend the ordinance dealing with dune crossovers. The initial draft taken to Planning and Zoning was to allow for an administrative special exception, which was language that we sort of used dealing with some sheds. And speaking with Planning and Zoning, what we came up with the language was simply to allow dune crossovers if approved by a building permit consistent with all the other requirements of the code. So that's the language you do see in the agenda item in the proposed ordinance 2021-03. To address the issue that the commission also brought up of steps for the dune crossovers not being addressed in the current ordinance, Planning and Zoning came up with the idea of just simply including decks, walkways, and steps in the current ordinance, that it shall not extend beyond the seaward toe of the dune. And part of that discussion was that Planning and Zoning was to not set some arbitrary size or limitation for a crossover, and also in recognizing in the current ordinance that it does allow for all existing dune crossovers to be allowed to be repaired or replaced should they get damaged. So if you currently have a dune crossover that extends beyond that toe, you could still replace it under the current ordinance. So that was what came out of Planning and Zoning. Their recommendations are in the current ordinance draft that's before you for first reading this evening.
Thank you. I'll now open the floor for commissioner discussion. Commissioner Cos.
On this ordinance, Christie, number 8, it says that everything is centered on a dune crossover, but we're including deck in that, correct?
Correct.
So should we simply do a dune crossover or deck? Because nowhere in there does it say deck, which is what we're trying to address.
I think right. If you go to,
But it falls under the other part of the ordinance.
right, it's
I'm sure it was the
inclusive.
intention of planning and zoning.
Right, I think it would be inclusive dune crossover of the deck, walkways, and steps. So it's all now included, because when you look at that initial definition of dune crossover, it does talk about the decks that are in addition to it.
Right, I understand that.
Can we say a dune crossover in parens inclusive of
Yeah.
definition number 4? I just think you're trying to be as clear as possible.
Right, because I don't want 10 years from now, somebody gets to do a crossover and then the town says you can't have deck.
Okay.
Okay, my other little issue, hopefully it's not gonna cause you problems. And you kind of hit it on the head there, Christie. When we say decks shall not extend beyond the seaward toe, I get that. But walkways and steps, so if I'm building a new deck, that means I am now dumping my passer rovers onto the dune. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So what's the solution to that? Did P&Z discuss this?
I believe, and I think someone who's here from the P&Z board, but I believe the discussion that we had was that the concern was obviously the toe varies depending on where the location of the crossover goes, but that they were struggling with, well, how do you set a size or a distance limitation on
realize,
that?
yeah.
Because not only does the toe vary from property to property, but it may also vary over time in terms of depth and height. So it's hard to sort of envision how they would come up with something that we could say, okay, everybody has to comply with this. So this was what they chose as the least arbitrary standard for all dune crosses, inclusive of the walkways and the steps.
We're kind of putting a burden on Durrani here. So let's take the people with the seawall. Let's suppose one of those people on Anna Street didn't have steps. Well, they're obviously their steps will be on the toe of the dune when they install their steps. See what I'm saying?
No, because that's backfill now.
No, I'm saying if somebody had a new deck coming in. If one of those houses didn't have a walkway.
No, there's the dune, the way that Anna Street is done, and you can see that pretty clearly on Anna Street, because I had the same thoughts that you had there. On Anna Street, when you come down the steps shoot out eastwards and then go south.
Right.
And where they go south, they actually end up in the sand, which is the dune. That's the backfill of the dune that was done towards the.
I define sand as not being toe. I define toe as having vegetation.
But I think in that particular case, because it's new, that would be considered until it's being vegetated. Is that a word?
So you see, we're setting up a problem for Durrani. I'm gonna, in fact, there's two new decks.
We just worked. Otherwise, and you have some of the owners over on either street that have already put plantings into that part of the
Right.
dune.
We're trying to obviously preserve the dune, but we're setting it up so that now when you exit onto the beach, you're going to walk on the dune. Pretty soon you're gonna have no toe there, so then you'll be within code.
Mr. Guy.
Yeah, yes, Madam Mayor. So it is a very difficult question. There are people that have full-time jobs called coastal engineers that spend hours, days. We're talking about rack line. We're talking about high-speed water line. We're talking about mean tide, low water tide. You know, I mean, it's a lot. It varies from day to day, hour to hour, season to season. The sand goes up, it comes down. It's very difficult. However, nature defines a line, and that's where the vegetation is allowed to grow.
What was that again, Jordan?
Nature defines a line.
The toe.
The toe.
Yeah.
And yes, it is a difficult thing to do. It varies from property to property, but on every property, there's a point where the vegetation stops. And that's what we're saying. At the end of the vegetation, that is where you have your last step, the step on.
So you step
the
down, hopefully on the sand.
On the sand. That is the thing.
No, you,
and having said all of that, we're looking at only about 5 properties in the town.
right, I'm just worried if you left here, the next guy comes along.
It will always be a difficulty. As I said, this is something that coastal engineers deal with every day, and it is a difficult thing. And again, it's only 5 properties, and you know, we have long discussions, and we came up with it's best to simply just use something that nature has provided.
Yeah, but that might hurt some residents in the future and might help others. Because after Sandy, the toe was almost all the way to the Old Ocean.
Yeah.
Hurricane Sandy. So then your toe is going to be much closer to Old Ocean. But however, after the sand is replenished, when we do the replenishing, the toe is now way farther eastward. So now I can build it even farther. So it's a very ambiguous, ambiguous.
I think you're missing
kind of thing. I mean, could we just say that the maximum length would be X amount from what we have now? And say, take an average of where we are now, to say if it's 15 feet beyond Old Ocean.
But for the properties that we're dealing with, it is not consistent. It changes from property to property. It's not as clear cut as that. Either way we use anything we use, I mean, what do we use? 3 feet past the toe, 5 feet past the toe, the mean high water line, you know, that changes over time, because that's an average over 90 years, 19.5 years. So it changes, and also by season. So the time of year you build your deck might affect the length you can make your deck. So it is something that will change.
Because when I go to put my deck in,
right,
my last supports are going to be in the dune, and then I'm going to have boards or steps that are going to hang. They will hang over the toe.
It will, and then we'll get covered at a certain season.
Okay.
And 3 or 4 of your steps will be covered by sand.
Always.
And then at another time, you have to make a deep step down.
But when,
So
when you
it
come
is
to
gonna
look
vary.
at that, and I'm not building a deck, this is hypothetical. If you come to look at that and the guy has his last step hanging into the sand, what are you gonna do?
That's fine.
Okay, that's not what this
We
ordinance
want
says.
on the vegetation.
All right, if that's fine, then then I'll go with it. One other thing I learned during this adventure. Did you know about the hurricane moratorium with Storm Sandy hit? So there's a moratorium on permits, on permits for the deck, the dunes. That was pretty cool. In other words, if a hurricane comes through and wipes out 20 decks, let's say it wipes out your deck, the town instituted a moratorium, so people didn't have to come, or flooded people didn't have to come in and go through the permit process. They could install their repair.
Reinstall, which is almost what we talked
Well, we
about,
did
what was
that.
there
The
before,
town's done that.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, I'd never
What was
heard
there
of it.
before?
It's a great idea.
Oh, yeah, especially if you get major destruction.
All right, so do you want to clarify this language anymore, Steve, or are you good with it, or?
Apparently, there's no way to clarify it. It's going to come down on the building officials'
I don't know.
subjective.
You had it right on point A. I'm sorry.
Oh, we're changing point A, yeah.
Yeah.
The fact that we're only covering 5 properties, if we were talking about half of our township was
Right,
then under an administrative
Mhm.
type of review, I think I'm.
Bigger burden.
Yeah, bigger burden. So I would now like to open the floor to public comment. Okay, I would now like to close the floor to public comment. I'll entertain a motion on the adoption of ordinance 2021-03 as modified.
So move.
I'll second.
That is a motion by Commissioner Cos, a second by Vice Mayor Hurlbert. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Moving on to agenda item number 3, ordinance number 2021-04. Clerk Armstrong, please read the ordinance by title into the record.
Ordinance 2021-04 is ordinance of the town of Ocean Ridge, Florida, amending its code of ordinances at chapter 52, waterways by renaming chapter 52 to waterways and parks, creating a new article for parks and creating a new section 62-61, hours for parks to address the operating hours of public parks located in the town, providing recodification, repeal of conflicting ordinances, severability, and an effective date.
Thank you. Town Manager Stevens, will you please advise us on this item?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. A request was made to the town by the Ocean Ridge Yacht Club to limit the hours of operation for the Ocean Ridge Linear Park, which they border. After review, town staff found that no ordinances were in place allowing the regulation of hours of operation of town parks. The county does have ordinances in place that allows for setting and posting of park hours along with an enforcement component used in all county parks and natural areas, enforceable by all law enforcement officers. These ordinances, though, do not apply to the town-owned parks. The attached ordinance addresses this issue and allows for the regulation of town parks, and it's staff recommendation that this ordinance be adopted.
And what are those hours, please?
Dawn to dusk.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, we'll be coming forward with a resolution if this gets approved tonight on second reading, because to establish the time by resolution, that way, if something comes up and you need to change it, you can do it with one meeting in the future.
Thank you. Okay, I'll now open the floor for commissioner discussion.
Sounds to me like it's a housekeeping item, just so we can set the time, so move that we adopt the ordinance.
Any other commissioner? Oh, hold on. We wanted to invite the public
I have my
out. Did we not?
that's
Yeah.
my comment.
Okay.
My comment is making a motion.
You can't make a motion yet. So hold on.
Okay, park-wise. So we're talking, I know we're the one we're talking with the Ocean Ridge Yacht Club. Does our little 50-foot section here include that?
No, you're right, it's an easement, it's not a park.
So we've got nothing else but the Chickasaw area.
Oh, well, that
No.
natural area.
And natural area. Any further commissioner comment?
We'll discuss the timing at the resolution meeting.
Yes.
Correct. Okay, I'd now like to open the floor to public comment. Hearing none. You'd like to make a
Yeah,
motion?
I so moved.
Okay, do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, that is a motion by Commissioner Pugh, a second by Commissioner Cos. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
moving right along. Whoever bet on an hour and a half, yeah, it's not looking good. Number 4, planning and zoning, agenda item number 4. Member Hutchins, will you please present the P&Z report?
Good morning, or good evening, Madam Mayor, Vice Mayor, and all the commissioners. This will be a discussion of what we talked about at the May 17th Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. There was no public comment. We approved minutes of the previous meeting, and during our discussion and action items, we selected Chairman Marsh for re-election as the chair for a year. Vice Chair Kerry was re-elected to serve as vice chair for the year. We just went over the amendments to the CCL ordinance review. There's questions with that. We have, I believe the attorney can answer that. And finally, I brought forward something where I asked the fellow P&Z members to consider reviewing the roof code for the possibility of increasing the flat roof percentage to allow more flat roofs. There was a consensus from the P&Z Commission to explore the possibility of changing the code to increase the flat roof percentage and decreasing the pitch requirement so long as the town commission consents to it. And that's all.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Okay. Would we like to go ahead and have that discussion now to give guidance to planning and zoning, or would we like to wait?
It's up to you guys. If you want to move forward and discuss it, then we need consensus from you all.
Well, it's been brought up. I don't know why we wouldn't discuss
I
it.
would ask to have that discussion now, since it's right now we're looking at an undisclosed timeframe as to when we have our P&Z workshop.
Okay, why don't you lead off?
I was at the planning and zoning meeting, that particular planning and zoning meeting, and it's an item that I had previously discussed with Dave. I had also discussed it individually with Mark over time, and the ordinance, or not the ordinance. The idea is basically as our buildings increase in height because of the flood requirement that we're subjected to by the state, we're seeing taller buildings in consideration to our road. So you're standing on the road hasn't moved, but your building has to be put higher by the flood criteria that are imposed on us. So the building itself has a higher altitude over the road, and in order to try to attempt to curb some of this increase in height, the idea was, well, if we're going with flat roofs, which seems to be the new building style that most architects like to take into account, or even try to hide behind our pitched roofs that we have on the ordinance. They're basically, we would give them the ability to do a flat roof, and just to be clear to the public, also a flat roof is not a flat roof, it has a pitch on it, it's just a much lower pitch than a pitched roof. So the idea is to basically reduce the height of the roof lines of the buildings themselves by allowing flat roofs to be utilized, which we cannot do at this present moment. Our code does not apply to it.
Mr. Guy.
Madam Mayor. So we have a situation, and if any of the senior commissioners could educate me at the end of my
Speak up,
statement.
please. People can't hear.
Yes, if any of the senior commissioners could educate me on how the town came up with a 15% flat roof restriction. That would be interesting to know. From the standpoint of the Florida Building Code, there is no restriction on a low-pitched roof. As a matter of fact, technology has increased to the point where they have a magnificent product called a TPO, which is a flat plastic PVC membrane that goes over the roof. Excellent, very good water, properties, rejecting water, keeping it really secure. So what we have in the town is, because of that rule, an architect who is adamant, the homeowner is adamant, I want the flat roof look, spends tens, if not hundreds of thousands dollars additionally to create a higher pitch roof as required by the code of 4 and 12, and then hide it behind a tall or parapet in some cases you can still see it. Why would we subject someone to this extra, thing? And then we also have the issue of the higher buildings for the purpose of scale. We also had an ordinance recently that is trying to limit the scale of a building. It would serve two purposes. One, it would be in the benefit of the town in controlling scale, because there's really no reason for this person to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to hide a pitched roof behind a flat parapet. And having said all of that, if we do move forward, we would need to look at what are the consequences. The first impulse of someone having a flat roof is, that's a perfect place for a party. Is that something that we want to allow? I mean, are we going to restrict it now only to equipment? A generator could go on a roof. AC equipment could go on a roof. We have issues with space and what we can do on a property. So that will give us also an advantage of putting things on a flat roof. So if we do, there are, things we need to look at. And again, if someone could educate me as to how we came up with the restriction of a flat roof.
I'll take you to lunch and be on an hour. Exactly how that transpired.
So that's just right.
Oh, absolutely.
Commissioner Cos?
I'd say, go ahead and put together what your suggestions are.
Well, if there's a consensus from you all.
Let me finish. Commissioner Pugh?
No, I think it's great. Yeah, I think the hiding that is a great idea. I still disagree with the go up 36 and go down 3 feet. I think that's ridiculous. But from your point, yes, the 3, doing it that way, doing a flat roof and doing it at a moderate pitch, be able to move some of the infrastructure you need for air conditioning and things like that. You can move it to the roof and be able to hide it in the 3 feet. That'd be great.
Commissioner Hurlbert?
That's not stuff you need.
Vice Mayor?
I'd be interested in hearing what you all talk about and how you come up with it. I'm certainly not against it, because you gotta be open, right? As long as the water is moving somewhere and it doesn't turn into, as I like to say, unexpected consequences of giving us a third, fourth story, then let's look at it.
I concur. I would be very strong in asking you to really review what is happening in Delray with their problem with these flat roofed places turning into not only outdoor kitchens, but pool areas, outdoor screening for movies. It's become quite an issue in Delray. They've had to pass several ordinances about it. So I would not be in favor of any type of recreational accessory use on a flat roof if we were to move that way. But I think it is.
I don't think you can ban a private homeowner from having a deck on his roof to get a view.
I'm not an attorney.
It's not just the deck.
It's not just the deck.
No, I
I
understand.
mean, it's the kitchens, it's the pool.
I understand, but it's like a deck on the roof so you can see the intercoastal or see the ocean.
I think according to our current ordinance, I know we're getting into the nitty gritty, which I really don't want to get into, but according to our current ordinance, we have 15% of the roof can be a viewing.
So if you want to stand on those 5 feet in the corner, you can. 5 feet in the corner, standing up there is very different than
15%, right?
15.
1
Yeah.
5.
So
1.5.
let's say, well, you know the math, the house is 20 by 40. So 815, you got a good 12-foot viewing deck.
Right.
Anyway, we'll worry about that when you bring it in, right?
So thank you for bringing forward the idea, and I think we have consensus that we would like for your group to go forward and discuss it.
With your permission, we appreciate it, and we just serve to take care of the needs of the town commissioners. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can I mention something to you, and maybe the town attorney, Christine? When we passed item number 2, did we resolve the question of dune and decks?
You said with modification.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I didn't, when I made the motion, I didn't say with changes.
With modification.
No, it was not.
The mayor did it.
Okay. Town Manager Stevens, agenda item number 5, will you please present your report?
Yes, Mayor. In the month of May, we celebrated the following employee anniversaries with the town. Dispatcher Danielle Valdez, 2 years. Public Works 1, Chad Armstrong, 1 year. Town Clerk Carla Armstrong, 4 years with the town. We thank them for their service and dedication to the town of Ocean Ridge. The second public hearing and adoption of the town budget was originally scheduled for Monday, September 20th. However, now that the county has given us their schedule and they are holding their second hearing on September 20th, we cannot hold ours on September 20th. So I'm proposing that we move that one day to Tuesday, September 21st. If you all agree, then we will update the advertisements and the website accordingly to the public.
Is that still at 2 p.m.?
No, it's at 6 p.m.
6 p.m. But our, okay.
Yeah.
Are you all available that day?
I am.
Make ourselves available.
Yeah.
I have no idea. I imagine. September.
He's just not gonna be on my birthday this year. Okay.
So this is the actual adoption, so this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the big one.
Did it at the.
This is actually a very quick meeting,
Yeah.
typically.
We're done.
Yeah.
So it's, all right.
You're all good with that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. No residents have applied to fill the alternate member position on the Planning and Zoning Commission by the deadline date. As such, the date to apply is being extended. Residents that are interested in filling this position should submit a letter of interest and resume to the town clerk by June 25th. The town commission directed town staff to schedule a joint meeting with P&Z members no later than July. However, since the summer season is upon us and some P&Z members have headed north or have travel plans, and town commissioners also have travel plans this summer, it has been impossible to nail down a date where everyone, or at least a majority, can be involved. We are proposing that we schedule a joint meeting in October when everyone is back in town. If there's a consensus, we will schedule a date.
Yes,
I think we
if
said
need-
that when we were talking about before, so it's not gonna happen until October.
Right.
You have your consensus.
All right, good. Thank you. The town of Ocean Ridge, as well as Palm Beach County, have revised their facial covering policies. Please check the town's website for more information on those policies, as well as information regarding COVID-19 vaccine opportunities. In really looking at the facial covering policy for the town, I think we may be relaxing that very soon. I don't believe that we will need to be extending our emergency declaration any longer. If you all are in agreement with that, then we will stop the emergency declaration and all of the associated COVID-19 policies in the town.
And what does that specifically mean about masks?
That means masks will not be required at all in town hall anymore.
By staff, by anything?
And what does that mean towards the budget? Are we still, no, we're not in a special.
The governor
The
has
emergency-
ended the
It
emergency.
hasn't ended, so
you're-
there's no more, okay, yeah.
We're not getting
Sorry.
any.
We save money on masks.
I have a whole bunch.
I
I
do
think we
too.
should have a big old sale.
No, that's for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is everybody good?
Everybody good
Consensus?
with that?
Yeah, staff good with that? Oh, we're good on your end?
We can achieve the.
So now.
Oh, you're the whole people.
You're free.
Okay. You have your consensus. There you go. Yeah.
Can I still social distance from everybody?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, right.
Agenda item number 6, town attorney. Godot, please, do you have anything to report?
I do not have a report. I'd just like to state that I do not discuss pending litigation in a public meeting. Thank you.
I was waiting.
We don't either.
Not on you. Not on you.
No?
Well done.
Nope. No. Gavel girl would have come out. Number 7, police Hutchins, will you please present your chief of police report?
Please accept the April report as is presented in your packet.
Oh.
You want to win that bet, don't you?
You're starting to sound like Chief Allen.
I'm working.
Yeah, he must have more right in it than I knew. Okay, agenda item number 8, the town engineer and public works report was included in your meeting package. Are there any questions or comments from commissioners?
A lot of stuff.
Seeing none, let's move on to number 9. Work with us here, Mr. Guy. Building official Guy, will you please present your building officials report?
Good evening. Good evening. One thing not written in the report is at this time, I do believe the residents should be benefiting from a reduced flood insurance rate. So kudos to the staff. This process started before I came here. And we do have a committee also in place, and they put in a lot of work, and the team that was here, they did work. So there should be an additional 5%. If you do not see this reflection, please contact Lisa Burns, who is our CRS administrator, and the staff will make sure that we get with your insurance agent and you do get this benefit. Otherwise, please accept everything else in my report as read, and if there are any questions, I'm available to answer. Thank you.
I just wanted to make comment after our meeting. I noticed that they sodded, they installed irrigation and they sodded on North Ocean Boulevard. So 4 years from beginning to end, we're actually going to have a nice field of green until it gets sold and
find
nice
money.
house. Huh?
And find money.
And find money.
So I actually had a question for Ronnie. I kind of brought this up in my staff meeting with you and Christy. The McCormick Mile seawall that suddenly popped into the middle of town. We need to know how far that extends south. Is that something that you can read that ordinance and know from the degrees, et cetera?
By the next commission meeting, we'll have a lot more information on that.
Okay. Just so people know what I'm talking about. The contractor stumbled across a gigantic seawall that was built in 1950. And we need to know how far south it extends so somebody else doesn't stumble into the same problem again.
Correct. I believe it started at the inlet and it's McCormick Mile. It goes a mile, but we do need some exact ordinance on it.
Like I was unaware McCormick Mile was in fact a mile. Maybe it's more.
Who knew? All right. Commissioner comments. Number 10. Repeal coconut trimming ordinance. Oh, please work with us here, Commissioner Rishlack, and then advise us on this item.
We've been struggling with this, at least I've been struggling with this, it's just me. Coconut ordinance, everybody's supposed to trim their coconuts by July 1st. We've had it on the book for what, 2-3 years now. Last year we ran into code enforcement issues that there were about 160 known violations against that ordinance. In order to bring that forward to the special magistrate, it would have meant months and months of code enforcement cases. Coconuts don't fly sideways, not even in a hurricane, and if they fly sideways, they don't fly far sideways. They're too heavy, they don't have the aerodynamic abilities of being picked up and thrown into people's houses and windows. I spoke with Mark on that subject, Mark Marsh, who lived in the island, who grew up in Jamaica. Lots of coconuts around his boyhood home, and he said the same thing. Coconuts fall down the tree; they don't fall sideways. So the whole coconut ordinance in itself, I think, is something that it's just we can enforce it. We don't have the tools to enforce it, it makes not much sense to enforce it in the first place. Creates a huge burden on the police department, who's out there, who has to look around and see people that have coconuts on the trees. I know at least my fellow commissioner Cost is an avid coconut fan and enjoys coconuts as much as I do. Drinking the water out of fresh coconuts is something wonderful. If you have to cut them down by July 1st, it just makes no sense to me. Where I do see a potential that we need to have something on the book is where it pertains to the public's right of way. So if coconut is hanging into the right of way, into where people are walking or potentially could be walking basically into town property, I think it is our obligation here to protect the townspeople as well as our insurance ratings, that if something happens, that we don't have to be on the hook for it. So anything that is on private property or is on public property and is maintained by a homeowner probably should be cut down and trimmed. Whereas if it's on your property, it should be on your property. I don't need to know about it. You deal with it. If it falls on your head, it's your problem. That's basically what it comes down to.
So Mayor, if I may, Christy and I had talked about it, and it would be our recommendation to repeal the coconut ordinance and then take care of the public right-of-way issue through a dangerous encroachments ordinance. And we already have a section in our code that we can just enhance with that.
Can we repeal the ordinance at this meeting?
No, that requires an ordinance.
So therefore, the enforcement's going to ignore it this year.
If that's your direction.
With the instruction of pending
July 1.
pending ordinance change.
If that's your
If
direction.
you direct the town attorney to write an ordinance for repeal, we will wait until the decision on that ordinance is made before we go any further.
We got consensus?
Yeah, I just want another thing to add. I don't think it's just right away. It's an issue of the hurricane coconuts, right? Which we decide the ordinance is horrible, but it's a public safety issue. It's not just the right of ways. It's people that have taller coconuts. As the town ages, there's some of these coconuts quite large. If they're going to fall on pedestrians on the sidewalk or the street, those need to be taken care of. It's a
Right,
safety
so that's
issue.
right.
It's not-
Yes.
That's what Martin said.
Correct.
Because I agree.
That's what I meant to say.
It's not just right away.
Yeah,
No,
no,
I
he's
know,
right.
because
He's right,
I
because
walk
it could be
here. I
on your
walk Old
property.
Nation all the time.
Yeah.
And what happens is the trees, because I noticed where those trees are, and right now, not even July, right now, the coconuts are falling because you see them at the bottom. And as I walk on Old Ocean, I'm looking at these trees that are hanging over the street. They might be parked on private property here, but they are hanging over the street, which then puts me in danger because we're walking. But I was also interested if we could get anybody find any background about that whole coconut flying thing? Because I tried to research it and I got both. Yeah, I got both infos. I got because of the weight, it only goes down. But I swear as a kid, I can remember finding coconuts in my pool that were not from my yard. So,
They might be rolling in your yard. They
nah,
fall down and then they roll into
yeah,
your.
with the
flying
flying
coconut.
Yeah, so, I was just wondering, I know what Mark says about having grown up on the coconut farm. I just kind of wanted some validation here.
Well, way back when this came up, I've talked to 3 different engineers. 2 of them said, number one, they fall down. And they also added that it's not like a flat object, it's curved, so there's not as much wind pressure. But one of them insisted it would become a missile. So,
See, the same thing, that's what I came up with, it was,
And it was one of the first times that I was on the dais, so I remember very clearly, I'd done a lot of research and made sure I said the right thing. One of the reasons that I think it got some traction was not only because of the hurricane portion, but at the time, there was quite a few older multifamilies on Tropical and some of those smaller streets that had these really, really tall ones. And the coconuts were dropping and they were breaking windshield of the renters. And when they called us to help, we said, we can't do anything. And now I know it's because it's private property. But even if it had been in the right of way, we would not have been able to do anything because we had no ordinance that covered it. So this is again, as we bring out ordinances, sometimes the law of unintended consequences, you don't know what you don't know until you don't know it. So I think that's kind of where we're going, so.
We're just talking about the hurricane coconuts, right?
We're just talking about coconuts overall.
Yeah, the hurricane coconut's a good idea because by the time the November storm comes around, you're already in cars like blossoming, so, you know.
Okay, so
Yeah, so hurricane coconuts, yeah, it's crazy.
how about non-hurricane coconuts?
Yeah, you need to cut those down because if your neighbor has a tree that has coconuts on it, it's hanging over where you're sitting lying down on the hammock, and one comes down, conks you in the head, straight down, not sideways. Then-
So you're
So
saying
there is
that,
we should have an ordinance or at least a.
Right, that's encroachment. Right, that's
Safety.
exactly what they talked about.
a safety encroachment.
So there you go. So it's really just.
So then in that case, the safety encroachment ordinance should also cover private property to private property, or should just cover the public?
Oh,
Because
this leaning
technically
over
it's a neighborhood, if it's between two property lines.
Then it
I'm-
becomes
if
like
I'm living
private
next to
property.
Steve's house.
You don't want to get into
Steve
that.
No,
You don't want to
We
get into
shouldn't,
that.
right?
No,
Yeah.
no,
Public
next-
safety.
yeah, next thing, you'll be tying it to a shed.
Right.
No, way. No. We usually don't take any comment during commissioner comments, but I see that maybe one or two people would like to make some comment.
You know, a fight.
Anyways.
This is Joanne Hagan. I know you want to address out. This is more of a legal, to me, there's more of a legal question with this. And it's sort of said casually here, but if you remove it, it's an ordinance. I mean, I understand that it hasn't been enforced. That doesn't mean it shouldn't be enforced, but it hasn't been enforced, or maybe you want to narrow it down. But my question is, what legal liability would the town be in if you take this ordinance away and then somebody really does get hurt and wants to sue the town because we took this ordinance away? I would think there would be, whoever got hurt could have a field day with the town of Ocean Ridge for removing that ordinance.
Town attorney, could you please address that?
Sure. I think what we're looking at is the town's real liability in this situation is governing the right of way, property that we have some control over. Coconuts on private property, the property owner is really responsible for that. And just because the town repealed a code requiring everybody to cut down coconuts at one time, if someone still get hurt from a coconut that comes from private property, I don't believe the town would have liability. Now, everybody can sue, and they do. Would we get sued? Potentially. Would it be a successful lawsuit? In my opinion, no, because of the source of where the coconut came from. And the issue that the manager mentioned was what's hanging over the right of way or encroaching upon the right of way. Yes, those are the areas that we need to be mindful of, because obviously we hold those right of ways in public trust, and we got to make sure they're safe. And if we know of a known hazard, like the significant coconut hanging over that right of way where people walk and traverse, we want to make sure that that's kept safe. So I think that's where the city's bigger liability or the town's bigger liability would lie. So I think that's what we're going to maintain and address that, whereas private property, I don't believe a lawsuit would be successful against the town for a coconut coming from private property.
I think there might need to be some education, if nothing else, at least in our bulletins or whatever.
Never heard.
Thank you.
Betty Baker, Morning Discussion. I think the original ordinance was written because Coconut Lane had a lot of coconut trees. We didn't have the ones on Ocean Avenue, we had some of the like coconuts out there. But the coconuts, there's sidewalks there, and the coconuts were dropping on people. And the ordinance was written to remove the coconuts from trees or overhanging right of ways, I believe originally. Was that not true?
You're right on.
I think so.
Thank you, Mrs. Bam.
Okay, super quickly, Sarah Sly, 16 Fad. I live next to a condo, and their coconut trees are over my driveway. And inadvertently, at different times, coconuts have fallen down and dented the car. Of course, you're not there to see it, so you can't say, oh, it was your coconut. Also, all down the easement, there are coconut trees. And if you look right now, Ocean Manor has two entry kind of decorative things, and a coconut has fallen down and crashed through it.
So they can be dangerous. They can hurt people. And when you have a private home and you're living next to a condo, you don't even know who to call, really, to say, please, hey, this happened. So I think it is important that someone kind of oversees this. Because they're really, they grow in these great big clusters and all of a sudden they drop. Anyway.
Thank you.
To that point, when you call the police department, call a town and say, hey, I got this tree.
Well, actually, excuse me, but you know it, there's a tree that catches on fire every night from Ocean Manor that hits the wires and sparks come down. And I've called the police department, I've called the town. Still does it.
FPNL would be the one to call.
Guess what? They're not interested.
That's sparking.
Yeah, they said, well, tell someone to cut the tree. Okay, who do you tell? I told someone cut the, he's seen it. I mean, everyone has seen it. It's every night sparks. Somebody's gonna catch on fire. It's not gonna be my house.
Depending upon the direction of the wind and how things go, yes, that happens. And we have contacted FPNL probably in excess of 20 times. And their response is that it is not a hazard. It is not a problem for their power service. And therefore, it's nothing that they are interested in doing. And unfortunately, because the tree is within 10 feet of the power line, we have some other issues that I've discussed with prior attorneys, which is why we handle things the way we have been. So I understand that issue, and we will continue to do trees and wires. And you will see us begin to do that assessment as we progress through the month, because we don't want to do it too soon, because as Commissioner Pugh says, if I have you trim them and they're short now, by the time we get a storm, so we try and judge our response to hurricane prep as we're experienced in doing. So you'll see that regardless of whether you appeal the coconut.
So has the property owner been contacted by the town to say, would you be nice and kind enough to trim your tree?
Yes, and the response is, we have had FPNL out and it is not an issue. And when we go out there, the tree is not in the wire. It's only in the wire partially when it's blowing. It's much like some of the other trees you see bleed out. So.
You want to see it?
So we address it with FPNL. We've had their tree trimming section and their risk section out many times.
Do you have that video that Sarah's talking about?
Yeah, I've seen it.
Well, no, if you have that video and send the video to FPL, maybe that'll change the situation.
We have been there with them.
Yeah, and seen it, yeah.
Seen the sparks?
Yes, called them with the fire department to come down when it comes.
What?
Okay, next public comment.
Earl Jones, 14 Sailfish Lane. I think the woman makes an interesting comment. If you eliminate this and there's no way of telling somebody they have to cut them down, now if their tree is hanging over your property, you have no right to tell them to cut them down. So they could have coconuts falling on somebody else's property. You eliminate the rule, and now you have no way of telling that individual that, hey, you really need to trim your coconuts.
Can I address that really quickly and ask Christie a question? If there's between two properties, if there's a coconut tree overhanging somebody else's property, that person can trim.
Right, that's correct. That's right. I mean, we don't normally recommend it. We ask people to be good neighbors, approach your neighbor before you go cut down any part of their tree. But yes, legally, your property extends up into the air, so if it's being encroached by another tree, you can cut it down.
Oh, Lord.
I know. She said it out loud.
Okay, is there appetite to look at repealing this ordinance by at the same time keeping the right-of-way encroachment portion within the code?
And public safety. Yes.
And public safety.
Yes.
Commissioner Bishop?
Yes.
Yes.
Commissioner Pugh?
Yeah, either that or somehow massage the ordinance that it would have to go out, and you have to, in hurricane season, you have to go more than just one time a year. You'd have to go out police would have to go out and go out and go out and go out. So it's either or. Either you're gonna do it and do it to where it's efficiently done and where it's done so where there are no coconuts on hurricane season, or you're not. And right now, we're not. So, but you still need the ordinance though for public right of way, so that in case coconut does strike.
Right, that's right.
And I think one of the reasons that it was so problematic when it first came out is that our only recourse for enforcement was magistrate, and taking somebody to magistrate was a minimum of $200 to $300 per violation plus staff time. I do know that we're working on modifying our codes to have a tiered fine opportunity prior to folks being taken immediately to magistrate, which might help with the enforcement side. That doesn't mean that philosophically what you're trying to do is not correct or incorrect, but part of the components of why you wanted to see this may be modified itself. So.
I think one of the key issues is not even the magistrate side. It's having our police officers go out and have to issue citations on 160 residents that have coconuts on their trees. The condo buildings by nature have tree services that cut these things down because they don't want to have the liability. So the condos are all in compliance, or most of the condos say are in compliance. Apparently not yours. No idea why.
Might want to find out who the insurance company is.
But it's something that it's just basically not even enforceable. So it makes no sense to keep it on the book, get rid of it, make sure that we protect the town and the town's interests and
Okay.
be that the right of way or be that on side streets where they're overhanging safety concerns.
Okay. I'm in agreement with the commission on this one. Okay. Ready to talk very fast? Number 11.
I'm gonna try to make that one fast. This is a doozy. What you're all seeing up there on the screen, those are shots that are off the Palm Beach, or of a Palm Beach County site. They are what is called the mean high water line, and it's actually not as clear on the site itself. So I went and I superimposed this blue line just to give everybody an idea of where the actual mean high water line is. What I'm asking here today is that we get a very clear understanding from our council as to what exactly it is that consists the enforceable part of Ocean Ridge. The way that the code is written, the way that the Supreme Court of Florida has done rulings on the enforceability of our beaches, interpretations, and then there is a wonderful 16-page doozy of a House Bill 631 that was passed in 2018. If that doesn't put you to sleep, I don't know what else will. We are in a position right now, and I'm looking there more into the future than real issues that we have right now. I think there's some disputes here and there, but there's no real issue. But we very well may have a real issue down the road with Boynton Beach increasing their density close to the intercoastal, and these people that will be moving into these new condos coming over the bridges and are using those beaches. This has a lot to do with the words public and private beaches. And there's a general question as to what is public and what is private. This mean high water line basically delineates the way I read the code, the way I read the Supreme Court decisions, the way I read a legal interpretation that one of our own councils has done in 2014. The way I read it is that east of that blue line, everything there basically is state of Florida. It might be by technicality private property to the homeowner that owns that part of the dune, but the state of Florida actually controls everything from that line outwards. Then there is what a lot of people refer to this as wet sand and dry sand. And that's a very bad interpretation of it, because wet sand is never what it actually sounds like it is. Wet sand is referred to as that blue line, and that's typically deep into the actual dry sand that you're going to see on a given day. The dry sand part, the ocean-rich part of our beach, is from that blue line to the line of the vegetation that is there, which is a movable line. And by definition of what the Supreme Court of Florida has given out, or our council, I can't remember which one, the vegetation line is basically from the vegetation line westwards, that is private property. That means the homeowner that owns, or the owner that owns that particular part of the dune is the one that can control everything that happens on that dune. That is literally trespassing if you step into that particular area. So the only area that, by my interpretation, we control, we as the town of Ocean Ridge, is between that blue line westward toward the vegetation line. And then obviously any homeowner can ask the police to come out if there's a trespasser that is actually in the dune within the vegetation.
What do you mean by the word control? The town doesn't control from the blue to the vegetation line. That's the private homeowner.
Well, it is under our jurisdiction.
Okay.
Yes.
So, in other words, you can call the police.
Excuse my choice of words there. It's the jurisdiction part. I'm not an attorney. So we're having these disputes, and I've been approached by a couple of homeowners that the dogs on the beach, how far can you enforce the dogs on the beach? And here's the problem. What you're seeing up there right now, that is the Porter Street deck that we were talking about earlier in the budget meeting. And when you look at that, the actual steps that lead down from that particular walkway ending up on state property. So anybody that uses that access never sets foot onto Ocean Ridge's beach. They're on the deck, they're walking down, and they're actually on state property. And this is one of the things where it gets hairy as far as enforcement of our dog on the beach ordinance.
So Commissioner
For
Vishalai,
example.
because this is like Mr. Bogdanov said earlier, we could spend about 2.5 days on this and all the maturations of it. What is the problem that we are trying to solve, or what is the idea that we have here?
What we're facing here is that there's two things. A, there's an enforcement issue that the police department will have, because you can challenge pretty much anybody for unless it's a criminal offense.
So enforcement of trespassing? This is very clear.
Trespassing, anybody that the police would stop within that blue line towards the water line, unless they're committing a crime, we cannot pass ordinances, or we cannot have our ordinances that we are posting on the entrances to that beach enforced past that blue line. Right? So anybody that wants to have a dog on the beach past that blue line can have a dog on the beach. unless the state has given
Palm
specific
Beach County
authority.
has clear rules that dogs are not allowed on the beach.
The state does as well. And in the water, I believe they're not allowed in the water.
But then that would be a state enforcement issue, not a town of Ocean Ridge enforcement issue.
Exactly.
So it would be, you would have to call Fish and Wildlife in order for them to come out and actually ticket that person that has a dog on the beach.
You know, when they're interagency cooperation, and you, chief,
Chief?
there we go.
Yeah, aren't you glad I said, accept my report? There seems to be some confusion on my part. And I will explain to you why. It is my understanding after 39 years being a police officer on the beach and having had many legal opinions regarding this, that yes, that blue line is the mean high water line. Let's just agree to that for the purpose of this discussion. If that particular property were a privately owned piece of property and not the Porter Street crossover, that private property owner's rights would extend fully to that blue line from the roadway, let's say. And from that blue line to the waters of the Atlantic Ocean, in accordance with our charter, is still within the town of Ocean Ridge, completely subject to any ordinance that you pass in the town of Ocean Ridge. It is also state sovereign land, and it is available under the Constitution of the state of Florida for the public to traverse and recreate. And please, if I say anything wrong, please correct me, because this is an issue that comes up a lot. Yes, we do have difficulty enforcing some of our ordinances because of those facts, and the fact that there is private property and there is areas that may be owned by someone that don't have 100% private property rights, let's just say that. And therefore, oftentimes police officers respond, and that blue line, and I know I say this to everyone, every time I've looked for it, it's been washed away or it's covered by the sand. And so it's difficult to see when you're on the beach. And I make light of that because there are people that insist that this is where the blue line is. And an officer has to make a on-the-spot snap decision. So we try and enforce the ordinances through compliance and education to get control of it. But unfortunately, we have issued citations for dogs on the beach. We have been successful in prosecution of those cases in the county court. So short of some other ruling or some other information that the town attorney has, it's a very difficult thing for us to do. We try and do it through compliance and education. And I'm sure that the town attorney is much better versed at addressing the other issue in the room regarding dogs. And that may be whether they are service or support animals, and there are other federal regulations that will preclude us from enforcing our ordinances, but they're very specific in how we do that. So we attempt to do it. I believe, and I think the town attorney will back me up on this, that all of the legal opinions support that we can. However, it is very difficult to make that on-the-spot decision as to whether somebody is standing east of that blue line or west of that blue line. And so we tend to err on the side of caution to protect the town from what.
My point. So well, basically, we don't know where that line is. And it's actually very close to the vegetation line. And as I said in the beginning, there's two components to this. There's the enforcement issue as far as our town rules. I read this a little bit different, but that's again why I would like to have a legal opinion on this. But the other issue is that the way that the Supreme Court has given a ruling back in 1974, and that's still the standing. That's not that I could find anything else. That's still the standing interpretation of that law. They're basically asking that if the the right of the public to the beaches of Florida. And that being from the mean high water line eastwards, if in our case. Then if we are interfering with the with the public having access to it, or giving the assumption that it is not public beach, we are actually taking away there's a potential that we are taking away the rights of the public to access that beach.
Roma versus Daytona.
Yeah, Tonorama, or whatever it's called. So we have to be careful basically with signs that we put up, that we do not give the assumed interpretation that this is a private beach. And that's specifically the words private beach play into a role here, because the beaches are public.
So what I would like to suggest is potentially bringing this back to the commission, and I would like to hear maybe some very specific ideas as to which signage, because we're finally getting down to the meat of the matter, which signs you feel are potentially either in violation or give the wrong idea, so we can actually have a very specific conversation about this. I'm not dismissing that at all.
Yeah.
I'm just, like I had asked the folks from the, the resiliency group, where's the meat? So.
Yeah, that's fine.
Would you be comfortable with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I'm uncomfortable with the whole subject. We've been through this in 2012 for 3 ugly years. We again went through it in 2016, 17. So it's a mess, and the police do the best they can with it. And we can certainly revisit it again.
Yeah.
Again. And by the way, on the dogs thing, half the time it's the residents' dog.
Yeah, the dog didn't just walk down on it. Somebody walked over the beach to get to that part of the beach. So, come on. And you want to say, oh, we can't have glass in the beach, so that's a public safety issue.
Right.
So what I think I would like to.
You want to make sure that the police, that's why we have an ATV. You want to be able, our police should be patrolling the beaches. It's a beach safety thing. It has nothing to do with public right. We're the town of Ridge is huge public beaches. I mean, think of this way, Goffins have 2 accesses. Palm Beach, 2 accesses. Ocean Ridge, how many public beach accesses does Ocean Ridge have? And county parks. I mean, so to say that Ocean Ridge is not public friendly, the beach is ridiculous. Just saying that the fact that we have to patrol the beach a lot of times to educate people that, look, I really don't want to be cleaning up your dog. There's no dogs on the beach. You really shouldn't be having glass on the beach, because that could be a problem if you break the glass. I think that is just common sense.
So I have consensus from you not to revisit. I'm trying to just move this forward.
I have no problem with it as it stands, because there is, as you know, it comes back and forth. Remember I said, look at Palm Beach, they just went through this for what, 1.5 years or what have you. And we got Daytona, and we got Palm Beach. It's a mess. I mean, rack line versus median line, where the high tide goes versus the low tide goes.
Yeah, but shouldn't we know where and what we
I
can
don't
do?
think anybody does. That's the problem, is I don't think anybody really does. Otherwise, it wouldn't be revisited all the time.
I would
Every
sure
town
hope
would
that our
keep going
attorney
down
does.
that. It's a moving.
But
organism.
what I'm looking for, and please, I'm going to end the discussion. What I'm looking for is consensus as to whether or not, for your suggestion, that we ask our town attorney for an opinion. Yes or no?
I like your idea. If there's a specific issue or geography that you're referring to, bring that to the attention of the commission specifically.
I think his ask is for a legal opinion. So we have to go with.
I'm asking 2 things. I can bring you the specifics on the signs that I could foresee could be a potential when it comes to litigation, because I don't want to have lawsuits. We're spending enough money on lawyers and defending lawsuits.
And your second request would be?
The second request would be to get an opinion as to what happens on the east side of that blue line and what can happen on the other side of that blue line.
So Commissioner Cobb, where do you stand on those two issues?
I think it's important.
Okay, I'm okay with it, but I'm just telling you, we're going down a path that we've been down before.
It's never pretty.
It's never.
Just look it up. We said, 3 years ago.
Did I send you our attorney's? Yeah,
Before
that you
you,
sent.
before you make a decision on whether you want the town attorney to look into this, let's ask Christie how long she thinks this will take her, how expensive it may be.
Madam Mayor, if I may, honestly, the memos that have been provided recently from 2014 cover the law as it existed in 2014 and pretty much as it existed now. The problem the police department has, at any given location along the beach, you have at least 4 different considerations. They have to look at the mean high water line. They have to look at, is there an erosion control line because they've got beach nourishment. They have to look at any potential easements. They also have to look at the past history, because that can also dictate conditional use. So at any time, the chief's officers have to make that decision. There's a variety of factors they have to take into consideration, and that impacts whether they do enforcement of a town ordinance or state law east of the mean high water line or west of the mean high water line. So it varies. And I think the only way that the police department could ever have the best answer it could would be for someone to GPS everything that we're talking about, have it in some system that the police department could then look at and say, okay, your coordinates right now show that you are east of the mean high water line, which varies. So it is a mess, and you would go to an extreme amount of expense, in my opinion, to develop that type of GPS system to address an issue that I think the police department is doing, what a lot of coastal police department is doing, the best they can to address issues when they arise. I'm happy to do an opinion. It will look very similar to what you got in 2014. There's not been much changes in the law in this area. And as everybody said, or most people have said, it really is kind of a mess.
Okay. It looks like I'm the deciding vote then, and I would, with all due respect, there's enough controversial things that we deal with on a day in, day out basis in this town, and I think that this is a sticky wicket, and I think if we were having a problem, a continual problem with the police, and the police chief brought it forward, that this is a source of consternation for his officers on a daily basis, then it would behoove us to probably look into it a little bit further. But at this point, I feel like we're trying to solve a problem that may not be solvable, and or we may not have right now. So I would say I would not be in favor of expending any legal funds looking any further into this. Okay, last but not least. Yep. We're almost there. Mayor's comment. One rumor that I wanted to put to rest is there's been 2 very aggressive trimmings of the dune along Old Ocean Boulevard. One was at Porter Street and one was across from Tropical. I actually got several messages forewarning me that how dare I give permission to allow these trimmings. I will tell you unequivocally, not any individual commissioner, whether you're mayor, vice mayor, or the newest on the bench, none of us have the right to give any dune trimming permit. So let's just take that off the table. It's in public record. If people are continuing to dispel this rumor, I hope that it settles this very clearly. On the back end of that, though, I have been working with Mr. Guy. They are well aware of the fact that our ordinance is not reflective of DEP height regulations for sea grape trimming, and that is something that will be brought forward, and that we need to be a little bit more judicious, even if the requirement, even if the minimum height for a sea grape is 42 inches. If it is a mature tree and they chop it down to 42 inches, that is an absolute startling piece, and I think that we need to do potentially a better job, particularly when it is a developer, not a personal property owner and or multifamily who really don't have that same vested interest. So I just wanted to put that out there. We all deal with things that we hear, that we say or we don't say, and truthfully, my tolerance for that is it's done. So, moving on to bigger and brighter though, I recently took a private tour of the Boynton Beach Library. If nobody has been over there, it is absolutely fantastic. And the director of the library is very happy to do a private tour for Ocean Ridge residents, including the book club or the garden club or anybody that would like to. So if you're interested in doing something like that, it might be a nice outing, especially now that we don't have to wear a mask. At least I will find out for the library. So please let Carla know if you would be interested in being on the short list to do that attendance. I'll be attending the Florida League annual conference in Orlando on August 12th. I was also recently appointed to the Florida League of Cities Utilities, Natural Resources, and Public Works Legislative Committee. We are trying to work very hard in guaranteeing some of these grants and appropriations for septic to sewer and sea level rise. Florida League of Cities has a great lobbying group, but they are always behind the ball. And if nothing else, we are trying to maintain that home rule that we desperately all need. And I think that's about it. Is there consensus or is there appetite for suspending rule number 9.1 for the next meeting to change the process for debate? Yes?
To do what we did today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Then fine.
Insignificant. Okay, I would happily like to call this meeting adjourned at 8:54. Thank you for attending. 7:54. 7:54. Really feels like it.